Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa-salamu ala ashraf al-mursaleen. Good morning, my students. It's my pleasure to start week 9, I think, in American Lit. I think we're done with Huckleberry Finn, the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. You might miss Huck when we approach Edgar Allan Poe and his bleak kind of writing. Yes, today we're going to discuss the fall of House of Usher, to talk a little bit about Poe, his Gothic traditions, his style of writing. And I'm not going to talk much because I don't want to subsume the voice of my students, because I have to leave for them something to say. But I would start by, getting somebody to come here to report about last week. Who's willing to come? Yes, Isra.
Good morning, everyone. This is my reflection about Huckleberry Finn as a whole. Although Huckleberry Finn is a novel which means written words, every time I read it, I feel that I am watching a real movie. Huck is a hero or a super actor whose performance is telling the story of the new world. I would describe it with a term that is called micro and macro, in a way that the American history is the micro and Huckleberry Finn is the macro. The whole fictional events are overlapping with the real historical ones. However, this leads to the question that we have raised at the beginning of the course. Can history be a bunch of lies? In another way, the novel is ornamenting and beautifying history because those settlers are portrayed as merely adventurers who do not have any agenda on the myth. As the church expelled them, Huck is sick from the religious practices and wants to emancipate himself. The same desire of expansion, especially reaching Cairo, is typically American. Then, when I think of Huck's lies, I say to myself, this might be a kind of confessional literature, how the great new world is built upon a great sin and an endless group of lies. Trying to pause and think about the Israeli literature, can it be taught all over the world as a fabulous achievement of the newborn country within 20 years? And at the end of the day, we are the terrorists and Bedouins. This makes me think again about the value of literature and how can we read and appreciate, though we boldly are probably sure that it is a group of lies and fabrications.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you. This is very good insight. And I like the way you are approaching this. I don't know, your questioning is valid because we are talking about a nation which formed itself as starting to sit in a land which was not there. They came, with this dream of establishing a city upon the hill. This dream started to deteriorate, but the will of expansion persisted. And Huckleberry Finn, with his frontier mentality, continued looking for, new adventures. He was trying to expand, the territory. It's like the American will to expand the territories. Yes, history and literature are overlapping. Okay, do we have another, student who is willing to report? Okay, so I would assume that it's with the time, summer saving time, everybody is coming in the morning, early in the morning. Anyway, today we are going not to see an Emersonian figure, but anti-Emersonian figure. Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe, in fact, is a sudden writer, even though he was nothing by birth. He was born in Boston. His mother was, a wandering actress, and his father, also was a kind of, singer. He was born by chance, and his childhood was very troublesome. His father, died, and his mother died when he was young, so he was adopted by a rich man, in Richmond, John Allan, I think. He was an aristocratic man who, as his foster parents, did their best to educate Poe, who was very intellectual. I think he was sent to England for 1 year, then he was sent to school and to the university. He didn't do well. He went to the army.
Yes.
He was in debt because of gambling. So his life was full of agony. He got married to his, cousin who was 14, who died later, and his life was full of sadness over her death. It seems like we are having a writer who doesn't seem to adopt the same views like Emerson. Emerson was the poet of affirmation. Emerson was the optimistic, and Edgar Allan Poe is the pessimistic. Emerson saw a kind of compatibility between nature and art, but Edgar Allan Poe didn't. Edgar Allan Poe was a transcendentalist, but in a different way. Both of them were transcendentalists. Emerson was transcendentalist, and he all the time he was
approaching beauty.
Yeah, the mind was going beyond the reason. He was taking us to the world of imagination. But for Emerson, what lies behind the reason was orphic beauty, something lovely, something you can identify with. You find a word of order, an ideal word. But for Poe, no. It was a little bit a word of mystery, a word of a vague word, but what it is, what they call the sublime beauty, the beauty of death, unknown. The beauty of unknown.
Yes.
And I think this has to do with his philosophy of composition, because Edgar Allan Poe did not. He was sick with the 19th century didactic literature. We should know that. Emerson and Poe are 19th century, and even though they were different, but both of them were trying to create a national literature, a literature which would fit the nation, which got its political independence. And later we are going to talk about how Edgar Allan Poe originated the Gothic literature. As I said, Edgar Allan Poe was sick of the didactic, let's say, purpose of literature. He didn't believe. He was embracing a very genuine critical point of view, which is art for art's sake. So you could say he was anticipating the new critics by this. He thought that the poem is a poem for its sake. The poem, is a poem with its aesthetics.
Elements that
He had a quote that he says that I'm not writing poetry for a purpose. I'm writing it for the passion.
Yeah, it's for his love of writing poetry. And this is what he says. We have taken it into our heads that to write a poem simply for the poem's sake, and to acknowledge such to have been our design, would be to confess ourselves radically wanting in the true poetic dignity. So if we are writing for the poem, for the sake of the poem, we think this is not perfect. But the simple fact is that we would but permit ourselves to look into our own souls. We should immediately there discover that under the sun there neither exists nor can exist any word more thoroughly dignified, more supremely noble than this poem. This poem per se. This poem which is a poem and nothing more. This poem written solely for the poem's sake. So this is very genuine. This is very, original point of view about literature. And perhaps this might explain the ambiguity, the mystery, the difficulty we're having in reading Edgar Allan Poe. So we're having, as I have just said, not a poet of affirmation, but a poem of negation. But I don't want to sound like he was a poet of negation, like he was totally negative. But it was his style of writing. He was delving in the world of mystery, trying to show how, in the depths of the soul, there is something, dangerous, something lovely, but it is dangerous. Edgar Allan Poe was a writer of mystery tale, and he was the father of detective stories. As I said, he, created the Gothic tradition. I know, the presenters, might be worried I'm going to say what they are going to say, but let me just go through the Full House of Usher. How did you find it, by the way? I think some of you have already embarked on reading it.
Yes.
Yes, how did you find it? Huh? One word, tell me,
Haunting.
Haunting. Excellent, haunting.
Uncanny.
Haunting, uncanny. I like you, okay. Yes, and I'm sure you are familiar with the elements of uncanny.
Yes.
So what is the most prominent uncanny element in the story?
Yes. The
Yes.
burial of
The burial of the
Yes.
dead.
Yes.
The burial of the dead. And you have the Lazarus presence, like a lady who's coming out from the grave, from the dead. Okay, what else?
Beauty.
Beauty. This is very. What is the beauty? Come on. You are trying
yes,
to
I do find beauty in his the whole story, the composition of the story itself, the horror there. I enjoy it, and even his language.
How come you enjoy something?
I didn't
Yeah.
find any characteristic of his beauty there.
Huh?
I didn't find
Like
any
the beauty of the way he composed this thing.
The
Not
beauty.
a
So
preview of the
And
actual
his
they,
of
they enjoyed the aesthetics.
the general
Yes,
format.
yes,
And I think, the poem or the story was full of suspense.
Yes.
All the time you wanted to
read,
know. So
yeah.
what? So what?
Yeah.
And suddenly, at the end, you have that.
You haven't catch anything.
That
The suspense
collapse,
is here
that collapse of the house
Yes.
in the top.
picture. The suspense is here when he is using the short sentences and the ellipses and scattered phrases.
Yes.
At the beginning of the story.
At the beginning, he was using short,
Long sentences,
But not
descriptive
that short.
sentences.
But you can say the poetic element.
Yeah.
It's
Okay, yes.
it's full of sad and miserable image,
Yeah.
which reflects the agony that writer lives on.
So yeah, it is colored. It's imbued by his view of life.
The atmosphere from the very beginning is gloomy. We
Yeah.
have it during a dull,
Till the
dark,
end.
soundless.
Yeah. And I think this has to do with his philosophy of composition, because in the philosophy of composition, it's an article. It's a posthumous article. I want you to read it. It's very interesting, because you cannot understand this story unless you read,
Philosophy of composition.
this article, which is very interesting. It's an article which sheds some light on his stories or his poems.
His way
So
of
he
writing.
believes that the good story is the story which starts by an effect.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think this story
affected us.
it starts by an effect.
He's
Okay, I don't like to talk long about this, but as you see today we are having the fall of House of Usher. Have you when you heard the fall of the House of Usher, like even before approaching, like the fall of the House of Usher, did you anticipate something? Okay, okay, we're going to have the fall of House of Usher.
Yes.
So, how did you react to that title?
Sir?
Yes.
You may have thinking about the collapse of the relationship between the family itself, not the house itself. But I thought that it was going the house, the
So you
building
thought
to
that,
collapse.
the House of Usher,
The family itself.
like the family itself.
Yes.
And like even in our culture, we say the house of,
Yes.
Habib, the house of, this is literal translation, but, we say the house of whatever. Okay.
But this title appeals to us as Palestinian because every day we hear the fall or the destruction of this
it
house.
appeals to us,
But it's not like
the fall
the
of
word
what?
fall.
It's like intentional fall.
Yeah.
It is
Yes.
it is the demolition policy of the Israelis, like demolishing our houses. So the
Yes.
fall is human.
This is the
But
polite
here it
way.
doesn't seem like it is human. Anyway,
Like a curse.
okay, it's a curse.
Yes.
Okay. Gothic, yes, this story is full of Gothic element, it's full of canny element,
Uncanny.
and you see, as we said, Edgar Allan Poe was trying to create a Gothic or American Gothic tradition. Of course, the British have their own traditions. You might have studied it in Jane Eyre or other. Have you ever studied like Gothic
No.
literature?
Yes, we have took it in
Like
Victorian.
Yes.
We took the Victorian Wuthering Heights.
Wuthering Heights,
Yeah.
it has some Gothic.
Some Gothic element, yeah.
But like Gothic, it's a kind of subversive literature, subversive, sensational literature. It's a literature. It is, I would say, literature which appeals to our senses. There was demand in the 19th century of sensational literature. So it's a literature which upsets the normal order of society. Like there is chaos, and this is what used to happen in literature. Okay, this is what used to happen in literature of English, British literature. Usually, the British, Gothic would start by the emergence of ghosts, supernatural elements, and then like there is a curse or something would happen. This would upset the normal order, and there would be conflict. Things would be complicated, but at the end, a state of normalcy is restored, or normalcy is restored. So the whole thing is to show how, when we follow reason, we are safe. Okay.
So he is still in the boundaries of imitation because he is reviving some of the romantic aspects. Fine.
Yeah, but like he's reviving. In fact, he's
Genuine in a different way.
romantic. He was criticizing the decaying romanticism. The romanticism Huck made fun of. We saw that gloomy kind of romanticism, that sentimental romanticism. He was trying to create something more genuine, something symbolic, something which appeals to the American taste, which appeals to the American urge of having their own identity. Because, as I said, he was trying to develop
Create something
his
new.
own, their own literature. I'm not going to talk now how it is different, but later. The Gothic, so this is a Gothic. It's very scary, very frightening, and at the end we are surprised by the fall of the house and the fall of the family.
Usher.
Yes.
Of course, the doubling motif, the doppelganger, like it's
Uncanny,
something uncanny. The sitting itself, the sitting of the table.
Description of the
Usually,
house.
the sitting here is a remote place, undefined place, a castle. There is a castle. I think in the 19th century, in America, there was a tendency to revive certain Gothic architecture. So there were many houses that built according to medieval style of having vaults, of having arches and zigzag. What we are familiar with this type of architecture. This tale, it has a structural unity, and I think as we did yesterday in rhetoric, says what unite this story, it's thematic, or the thematic unity of this story is its mystery. So this is like how we're tracing back the Gothic traditions in England. So we're talking about Horace Walpole, a novelist, an English, Anne Radcliffe, and Matthew Monk. It was, this type of literature was popular in 18th century Britain. And the American, imported this form. However, we have a point of departure because, as we said, in the 19th century, Emerson and other people, even like Poe, wanted to create a literature of their own, a literature which would parallel to the political independence of that time. So you have to be different. How can you be different? Like this is Gothic architecture in America. So they started to have, they don't have ruins, but they have these, new Gothic buildings. You like this house?
Yes.
That's
Beauty, not color.
It's beautiful.
From the outside.
From the outside, but you don't know.
What is
like,
the outside?
From the outside, these walls, these, zigzag, these
Hidden walls and hidden...
cave-like rooms. So,
You find the beauty in Gothic.
You find beauty in such Gothic.
Yeah.
Nowadays we have, even in Palestine, some people would love to have a house like this. But look here, we have, the sitting is an American house. It's not like in British literature a ruined castle. We don't have castles. We have American house. The sitting is American house. It is American house situated somewhere in wilderness, in a remote place. Again, the Americans were trying to find sources of horror because for a Gothic story you might need certain sources of horror.
Yes.
So you have here, like the sources of horror are coming from these Gothic buildings. This, as I said, like this Gothic literature started. This Gothic architecture started in US about 1840, so 19th century. It was characterized by steeply pitched roofs, like this. Pointed arch windows, elaborate trim around roof edges, high dormers, lancet windows. It's like Victorian style. It's a little bit. Yes.
Like if you focus on, we can see that these are the windows, are the eyes, and the doors, the mouth. and stalking and something.
Like
Yes,
They establish identity.
it looks like
Swallowing
it has
you.
this, animated or
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
like a person.
Animism.
And perhaps this might explain the analogy between or
The setting and
this,
Architecture.
The
not the
thematic.
setting, like when he was in the story, we are forced to make analogy between the usher, himself the person,
Yes.
and the house.
the houses.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah, this is like Home's House of Usher.
The haunted palace.
Okay. It's like a castle.
Yes.
But it's not a castle.
Evil Tower.
It's like a cathedral. Yeah, even before. Okay, this how the house might look.
From inside.
Yeah.
Not from outside. في شجرة
These are the trees.
trees and there are trees and
Yeah.
I mean the story when he approaches with his
yes.
horse.
Yeah.
We are working.
Okay, so in the Gothic, I don't want like this emphasis on the setting. On the setting, you have the exterior landscape, the interior, the houses themselves, the castle-like literature. Characters are brooding, secretive. Characters are ghost-like. We don't have ghosts in America. We don't have a culture of witches, ghosts, but instead. Perhaps you might have noticed in the story how people were transformed into ghost-like. Even the doctor, the valet, we saw them like ghosts. They were moving quickly. So in America, like you could say, unfortunately, in some of their writings, like in folklore, African American were like taken, like sometimes they are there, they're as a source of horror, like Native American. So I was saying like the Americans were trying to create literature, Gothic literature from their own environment.
Yes.
Okay, but this means like in American Gothic tradition we have a shift from the external to the internal. I don't want to talk about the doubling motif. Okay, of course, the doppelganger. Do we have doppelganger in this story? Like doppelganger, like
Just when he at the end, he and his sister became one.
he and his sister, the house and the family itself.
Yes,
Okay.
became one at the end.
Yeah, like because they are seen as doppelganger. Now, in fact, this story is full of symbolism.
Yes.
Yes, Emerson was perhaps a symbolist writer, and he, in nature, in the American scholar, in the poet, he was telling the American how to create their own symbols.
Yes.
But when the French symbolists in the 19th century wanted to demonstrate their theories about symbolism, they didn't go to England, they didn't look at Emerson, but they found like symbolism or the symbols of Edgar Allan Poe the most exemplifying of their own theories. So we have here a writer who's very clever at using symbols, and I think this might make us think about the symbols in the Fall of House of Usher. Okay, so Roderick here is an artist figure, and he has a melody which is what is his melody? What was it like? What was the problem? Yeah, he had acute senses. He was not like able to listen to certain voices.
Fantastic.
He was sensitive to smell, to taste. So these are acute senses. And at the same time, he was hypochondriac, like he was afraid of imminent death. He and his sister were hypochondriac. They thought, they were shuddering with fear because they thought they are going to die soon. And like,
And
do you think
became
this is
a
very
truth.
frightening? You know?
Yes, to live in
Yes.
death.
Yeah. Like if you are thinking, and what would happen to me? This is very scary.
Waiting for unknown.
Okay, again,
No.
imagine these people are living in a remote house, like he's not living with his wife, but with his sister and twin sister. Both of them are pale. Both of them are having this, malady, this fear that they are going to die. Very frightening.
Yes.
I have to skip this.
نقرأ الكوتيشن.
Yes. Here, like, we see in the story that Roderick's mind was agitated, was affected by the surrounding itself. Because the surrounding was full of fear. The house, the wilderness. Okay?
Yeah.
And he was agitated. He was enchanted by certain superstitions, impressions in regard to the dwelling which he tenanted. Even the narrator himself was going to pick up like some of this effect, and he was shuddering with fear because he was afraid he would get the same malady.
Yes.
So he barely escaped when the house collapsed. Okay, of course in the story, like body and soul are also an example of doppelganger. Now in the story, like we have in the background of the story painting, music, mad twist, and
Guitar.
the narrator who came from like a schoolboy maid who came from far off land to soothe, to alleviate the pain of his friend, was trying to read for him some poetry, was trying like to make him listen to music, but what was the result? What was the result? Yeah, like Usher's, condition aggravated. Usher like became worse and worse, and I think this is a message here. I don't know, like if art has to serve anything beyond an art, it is like what they say, it's a kind of fallacy.
Yes.
So this is the didactic fallacy. I think the whole story is a kind of parody. Like there is a parody of Emerson. He's trying to parodize, and you're familiar with a parody. You feel this parody like clear at the end when the town and the house meets its reflection in the town. This is like sheer parody where he was mocking the assumption that the art, is a mirror of reality, is a reflection of reality. So he was mocking this didactic motif which was developed by Emerson. I don't like to talk about these characters, but they were like ghost-like.
Yes.
Ghost-like
Yeah.
characters.
Mad.
Madeline, like
Mad.
Madeline, she was buried alive, and then she came back.
Yes.
So there are many interpretations of like her. Why was she buried? Like, did he know that she was alive? And then when she came back, why did she attack him? Why? Was it a kind of revenge? So we have to see why. Okay, so. What's point? Poe's point. Here, I think this has again to do with the philosophy of Poe. Poe addresses the dual and the conflicted nature of the self. So we have like the self, the reason, the imagination, the body. Mind and body are at war with each other in each of us. Right?
Yes.
And again, like here, mind and body, like this harmony, which was perhaps, later we're going to see how Whitman will very paradoxical to yoke together. And this is how we saw like Taylor brought together. So here he thinks that they are like at odds with each other. We try to repress one side and live without it, to repress the body and live without it, or the soul and we live without it. And this is like insane. This is a kind of insane. But we cannot achieve a harmonious existence in this way. Again, so if we neglect either of them, we are going to suffer.
Yes.
Okay. This is very, and again, this is very symbolic, isn't it?
Yes. How even our Islam, we have the translations.
Yeah, it's very symbolic, like because America was divided over the issue of spiritualism and materialism.
Yes.
We saw
Dictum.
this conflict
So
between
the conflict.
materialism and spiritualism, Edgar and Allan Poe, in Huckleberry Finn.
Yes.
I don't want to be longer than this because the presenters are worried that I might say whatever they want to say. They're smiling. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I don't have to go like over, so you can come here and have the floor for you. I'll be sitting there watching you. And perhaps, would you like me to interrupt you? Okay, good. We have like 20 minutes, I think.
Something new in American literature. Outline for this presentation will be like that, the author, the Gothic in American literature, and about the story, the summary and theme for us. Okay, about the author, he was born in 1889 and died in 1848. And as the doctor said, he was a master in Gothic literature and horror and blood and death. And also, he wrote only one novel and 50 poems and 70 short stories. And something important in his, maybe new in his writing is that he wrote the death. There was a death of a beautiful woman, or a common topic in his work. Also, every time in his stories, that he said, "Women have been angels of mercy to me." What made him talk about the women in his stories is that he has in his real life, he has experience with women. His mother was died, his beloved was died, and his wife also was died. So this affects his poem. Another thing is that didn't, at the beginning of his writings, he didn't want to write about the Gothic. He was mocking the Gothic stories. So I don't know why he started.
So he was mocking the British Gothic stories.
But start his own.
He started his own.
Yeah, and he was trying like to make
American
himself
Gothic.
different, like starting his Gothic tradition.
About his death remains mysterious, and his final words were, "God help my poor soul," and that we can see that his life, his real life, is also a Gothic story that it's full of mysterious and death and blood. Moving to the next slide is about. About the Gothic literature, the third Gothic was appeared in Europe and British before the American literature, and also the Gothic in American literature was not that popular in America since Hawthorne and who appears to write in this genre, and by the
I think
19th
there was
century.
another writer called Charles Brockden Brown.
Yes.
He was like in his novel Wieland or the Transformation. It is a Gothic but he was like halfway between British and American. He was trying to show how, like, some people, when they become diabolic, they become satanic. Clara was in her room listening to voices, and she became like a ghost like herself.
About the American Gothic literature, the themes of their literature, they talk about the family structure, the violence, the unreliable narrator and translations, and the religion. We can see them in our story, the full literature.
طب الدنيا
والله شوبانة
حابس بنات الخط شايفين كيف الخط ما بيصير كده
كثير صغير شايفينه
اطفوا الضوء.
راعي في ناس
عليك
في التسجيل فيش مشكلة عندي لأن أنا باخد على اللابتوب مباشرة ما مش على السبورة. أنت اقرأي على اللابتوب تقرأيش مش شايفة حاجة. اقرأ على اللابتوب مباشرة. صحيح يا دكتور؟
ماشي.
Before we move into Asma's part about the summary and the themes, I want to talk about the element of Gothic in Edgar and who's himself fiction and Gothic. About the setting, as we see in the story, there's a landscape, a castle, and something that, as the doctor said, undefined place. And also we can see a hidden evil as unspeakable, mysterious crimes, and also we have death in blood and body parts in his stories. And we can see also that we can see that there's a characters in his story, male and female, and the female is died or dying in the story, and they are applicable in the fall of the house of Usher. And now we'll talk about the summary. The summary and the themes.
Okay, before I start talking about the summary, I want to talk about the characters. We have in that
story.
In that story, we have three characters only: Roderick, the unnamed narrator, and his sister Madeleine, Roderick's sister. Okay. The summary starts with the unnamed character. He received a letter. That letter was from his boy friend whose name is Roderick. Roderick invited him to his house to stay with him because Roderick is suffering from emotional and physically disease and problems. After that, we met the third character, which is Madeleine. Madeleine suffered from an illness which doctors can't reverse. Okay, the narrator spent several days to cheer up his friend Roderick. He read for him books, then he played guitar for him. He tried to cheer him in many ways, and he make up words for his songs, so he sang for him some songs and played for him the guitar. After that, we can see that Madeleine dies, and Roderick decided to bury her inside the house, or in the garden of the house. Because
inside the house itself, there was a wall, and inside the house.
the reason behind that he want to bury her inside the house, that he is afraid from house, and he afraid from doctors to take her body and make a scientific examination at it. Some events more than Roderick, the unnamed narrator, was sitting alone in his room. Then Roderick interrupted him and entered the room and said that I am afraid from the house and I can't sit alone with myself. So the narrator tried to spend on the night. So he started read something for Roderick. He read for him a book which named
Mattress.
Madras. Okay. While the narrator was reading, he heard some sounds. At the first time he ignored that, and the second time he ignored that. But after some times he can't ignore the sound that he's hearing. So he told Roderick by that. Roderick said that I will reveal you a secret, that I buried my sister while she wasn't died. The narrator got afraid from that, and Roderick told him that sounds are Madeline sounds, and she's trying to escape from
The grave.
from the coffin. Yes. When they were sitting at the home, the wind opened the doors, and his sister Madeline was standing in front of them, and she's full of blood. First she attacked her brother, and he died from his afraid, because he was afraid a lot. Then after that, the narrator escaped from the house, and the crack which we can notice, which the writer of the story told us that there was a crack, a small crack in the house. The crack became bigger, and the whole house break in the frame and crumbles to the ground. And the story ends by that. Okay. Moving to the theme of the story, we can see the theme of morality, madness, fear, friendship, the arts, incest, and refusal. I'm going to comment on about some of them. We have mortality and madness. Madness, we can see the madness of her brother Roderick, and how he generated that theme inside the story and many actions. The theme of fear, I think the theme of fear was dominating the whole story, that we can see the fear of the narrator while he heard the sounds from Madeline sounds while she was escaping. We can see the fear of Frederick himself, yes. And we can see that the theme of fear affects us while we reading that story.
But these themes, like, we make of the story. But like the writer did not intend, to hint to any of these themes.
Yes.
Perhaps the main theme he wanted to hint to was the
Gothicism.
theme of the composition itself. The theme of writing us. These themes, like we, as reader response, we are reading them, like we are interpreting. He didn't mean any of these themes. See what I mean?
How can we know that?
Pardon?
How can we know that he didn't mean any of them?
Yeah, because if you read the philosophy of composition, if you read the principles of writing, read what he wrote about literature. So he didn't believe that art should convey any message beyond being an art. So these themes we are making while reading. See what I mean?
I said that we can feel by feel when we are reading the story. We can see, from our point of view, we can see the friendship between Roderick and the unnamed narrator. That the unnamed narrator quickly responds for the letter which his friend sent it to him, and he wasn't know the the real reasons behind the intervention. We can see the arts and how they try to escape from their fears.
Yes.
Reading books, listening to music, etc.
Not unusual. And they also what it as is
Thank you for this presentation. Okay, I would consider today's class as a point of entry to probe to the fall of House of Usher. But we have to read the story more, to go deeper, to analyze it, to see how poetic it is. You know, it's very poetic how one source of fear is the language itself.
Yes,
The way he was using the language.
introducing.
Sometimes you feel you cannot follow up. We're going to see how he was using what is called ratiocination. What is ratiocination? It is like using intuition as a kind of deduction, like substituting reason by intuition. So it was like his intuition, like what happened to the narrator when he tried to organize the particulars of the scene in order to perhaps have a lesser effect than the real scene was giving him. But the fact, like here, he was trying to use his intuition rather than his mind. And this is like perhaps a feature characteristic of
Gothic.
prose. I don't want to go to this, but next time I'm sure we can elaborate this more.
Yes.
And I want you to come ready to discuss. I think next time we're going to appoint like half of the lecture to discuss this and half of the lecture for the Raven. Is everybody present with the Raven? Okay, the Raven is a poem to read, and it is further exemplification of Poe's insistence on the aesthetics rather than the didactics, or the didactic element. Thank you for being very responsive, for being good listeners, and good participants.